Folks round Silver Butte still whisper about the saloonkeeper with the steady hands and hollow eyes. He came with no past and no name worth remembering. Just an old Henry rifle packed away under the floorboards and a silence too loud to ignore. They say the Devil's Tooth gang made the mistake of laughing at him once, and they never laughed again. He never raised his voice, but the day he did, it echoed louder than thunder rolling off the canyon walls. And when the smoke cleared, folks remembered why ghosts don't always wear white. The sun rose hard over Silver Butte, smearing blood-orange light across the thirsty desert floor. Wind whipped grit against the weathered buildings like whispers from the bones buried deep beneath the sand. The town stirred slow, cautious, like it always did since the gang came down from the north and made hell a local stop. At the edge of the town's one dust-rutted street stood a crooked sign, swaying on rusted chains, the Crooked Table. Its windows were boarded, its paint peeled like old sunburn, and its porch leaned on one leg like it had given up trying to stand proud. No one had dared reopen it since the last owner was dragged into the alley behind it and taught how deep the Devil's Tooth could bite. That morning, a rider came alone. No noise, no flag of dust, just a figure on a tired gray mare, moving like he'd forgotten how to rush. He dismounted with the creak of old leather and the quiet certainty of someone who'd once moved quicker than most men could think. He didn't speak, not even when two boys ran past and stared like they were watching a ghost walk upright. By noon, he'd bought the saloon. Cash. No questions. Sheriff Dawson raised an eyebrow and asked his name. The man just nodded once, handed him the deed papers already signed. The sheriff figured he'd seen all the kinds of crazy there were in his time, but the kind with no name and a full purse made his teeth itch. He moved in that same day, carried nothing but a worn duffel and a hammer looped through his belt. Folks watched from behind shutters and swinging doors, whispering behind calloused hands. He don't look like he could fire a pistol, let alone hold a bar. Someone muttered at the barber's. Another laughed. Probably some city fool who thought he'd buy a quiet life and found himself in a snake pit. But they watched. They always watched. He worked with a focus that didn't belong in a place like Silver Butte. Each nail he drove was measured by eye alone. Each board he replaced seemed to land flush with the last, like he was building something out of memory, not wood. By sundown, the porch stood straight again for the first time in 5 years. He never spoke. Not to the sheriff. Not to the drunk who stumbled past. Not even to Lucinda May, the baker's girl with kind eyes and questions stacked behind her teeth. He nodded, once, when she brought him coffee in a tin mug. That was enough to make her heart ache and her father frown. On the third day, he stepped into the saloon with a crate of old glass and started cleaning the bar. Dust rose like ghosts, and the sunlight through the gaps in the boards painted the place in stripes of gold and shadow. He moved behind the bar like he'd done it before, like he could do it blindfolded. The stools creaked as if recognizing an old rhythm. Later that evening, a group of ranch hands gathered outside, watching as he stood a whiskey bottle at the back wall and stepped away 10 paces. They expected a show, maybe a drunken toss or a clumsy stumble. But instead, he picked up a hammer and a bent nail, looked once, and drove the nail into the wall behind the bottle. No measuring tape, no chalk, just the kind of precision that made grown men go quiet. The rumors started then. He's military, someone said. Nah, bounty hunter, another guessed. Too quiet for a lawman. Too calm for a drunk. He don't blink right. Lucinda heard them all, but she also saw the way he watched the street when no one thought to look. How his eyes moved before his head did. How his fingers brushed the countertop like he was checking for dust and angles. On the 7th night, the Devil's Tooth gang rode through town again. Hooves loud, mouths louder. They tied their horses to the sheriff's own rail, knowing full well Dawson wouldn't object. They drank, broke bottles, fired shots into the air. When they passed the Crooked Table, one of them spit on the steps. Another laughed. Hope the new barkeep's ready to be our maid. The man stood inside, polishing a glass. Didn't look up. Didn't flinch. But he saw. That night, under the lamplight of a single oil lamp, he opened the floorboards behind the bar. Dust swirled around him, thick and soft like years settling. His fingers reached down, slow, reverent. Wrapped in oiled cloth and silence lay a long rifle, the kind not seen around these parts for years. A Henry repeater, scope-mounted, worn smooth by time and blood. He stared at it, not like a man seeing a weapon, but like a man standing over a grave he thought he'd forgotten. Then he covered it again. The lamp stayed burning till morning. By sunrise, the saloon's windows were clean. The floors swept. The crooked sign repainted in fresh black ink. The crooked table, open for business. No one knew his name, but suddenly, no one cared to ask. Because in Silver Butte, you learned fast. Some men speak loud to be heard. Others are just waiting for the wind to blow right. They came at dusk, kicking up a storm of dust that dragged long behind them like a funeral train. 12 horses, 11 men, all with mouths full of cruel laughter and saddlebags, clinking with stolen coin. The Devil's Tooth gang didn't sneak into towns, they announced themselves. And Silver Butte had learned long ago not to flinch when they rode in, because flinching made them smile wider. Bodie Cray led the pack, same as always. Long black duster coat, flapping like a vulture's wings, silver tooth gleaming under the brim of his hat. He didn't look like much at first, slim, twitchy, but there was a kind of violence in his posture that made men forget their own names. He'd slit throats for the way a man looked at him, laughed while doing it, said it cleared the air. The gang poured into the saloon with boots heavy and voices louder than sense. They shoved open the doors like they owned the hinges. One of them, young, wiry, eyes too bright, ripped a bar stool off its legs before even reaching the counter. Another fired his revolver into the ceiling. Dust rained down. Somewhere upstairs, a rat scurried between rafters. Behind the bar, the saloonkeeper wiped a glass clean. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Well, well, Cray said, eyes crawling up and down the man like flies on meat. Ain't you just the picture of polite? He pulled off his gloves finger by finger, letting them drop to the floor like they didn't deserve better. The saloonkeeper slid a glass of rye across the bar. No words. No nod. Cray chuckled. Might be you're deaf, friend. Or just slow. He took the glass, sniffed it, poured half onto the floor. Either way, you're working for us now. The gang hooped approval. One climbed onto a table, boots stomping as he danced with no rhythm, only mockery. Another started throwing cards in the air like confetti, shouting something about this place needing fresh air. Still the saloonkeeper said nothing. He poured another drink. Then another. Hand steady. Face unreadable. Look at him, sneered one of the younger gang members, thin as a broom handle, drunk already, quiet as a priest and twice as stiff. He staggered up to the bar, breath soaked in cheap liquor. What's the matter, old man? Cack out your tongue, or did your balls shrivel on the ride-in? No reaction. The saloonkeeper poured him a drink, turned to polish another glass. That was when the boy threw the whiskey in his face. The room froze for a second. The wet slap of liquor hitting skin echoed louder than the shot from earlier. The saloonkeeper stood still, eyes closed, drops running down the creases of his face, over his unshaven jaw, dripping from his chin onto the floor. Cray watched. So did the others. The boy laughed. Guess he don't mind it. Hell, maybe he likes it. The saloonkeeper opened his eyes, reached for a towel, wiped his face clean. Then he went back to polishing the glass. A silence fell, thick and strange. Something in it made even the drunkest among them lean back, just a bit. But Cray grinned. That's what I like, he said. A man who knows his place. Behind the upright piano in the far corner, Lucinda crouched low, heart hammering so loud she feared it'd give her away. She hadn't meant to stay that long, but curiosity and worry had pulled her feet into the saloon when the hooves arrived. Now she watched through the slats, breath shallow, sweat beading at the nape of her neck. She saw him then, the saloonkeeper, not for how still he stood, but for the way his eyes moved. Just once. A flicker. Left to right to left, across the gang, across their belts, holsters, boot knives, every one of them. It wasn't fear. It was measurement. She sucked in a breath. Her fingers dug into the edge of the piano, so hard she thought it might splinter. The gang didn't notice. They were busy throwing dice across the floor, flipping tables, shouting at shadows. Cray leaned against the bar, tapping a coin on the wood like it owed him time. "Say, friend," he asked, "what's your name anyhow?" No answer. "Suit yourself." Cray winked. "But you keep pouring drinks and smiling like that, and I might just keep you round for laughs." No smile came. Later, they stumbled out, drunk on their own noise. One of them kicked over a hitching post on the way. Another spat on the saloon's clean step. Then the horses carried them off into the dusk, dust swirling behind them like the ghosts they hadn't made yet. Inside, the saloonkeeper swept glass from the floor, replaced the barstool, rinsed the towel. Every movement quiet, precise. The piano keys never stirred, though Lucinda stayed hidden another 10 minutes before finally slipping out the back into the night. At home, her father waited, sharpening a dull blade with hands that hadn't held steel in a decade. He looked up when she came in, his eyes catching the tremble in her shoulders, the way she shut the door and leaned against it like something might chase her through. "They went in," she said. "I heard." They threw whiskey in his face. She paused. He didn't blink. The old man grunted. "Maybe he's scared." "No," she said. Her voice cracked but didn't break. "He's not afraid of them." Her father turned back to his knife. "He's weighing them." Her voice lowered, steady now. "Like a hunter sizes game. Like a storm watches the land before it breaks." For a long time, the only sound was the scraping of steel against stone. Outside, thunder rolled on a sky without clouds. They used to call him the ghost at dawn, though not to his face, and never twice in the same regiment. He had no flair, no appetite for recognition, just a rifle, a steady breath, and a patience that made lesser men twitch. In the winter of '64, just north of Cold Creek Ridge, he dropped 6 rebel scouts at 300 yards in under half a minute. No spotter, no corrections, 1 bullet per man, each clean through the chest. The last never even knew he'd been aimed at. They said his eyes were ice back then, unshaken, untouched. But it wasn't true. He shook, quietly, after the smoke cleared, after the bodies cooled. He always shook when the silence came back. War ended, but the killing didn't. The frontier had a way of dragging the blood out of a man, 1 drop at a time. He tried ranching, farming, teaching a 1-room schoolhouse, where no one learned anything but how to lose. For a while, he raised his boy Benjamin, with calloused hands and stories of hawks and rivers, not bullets. The rifle went into the ground beneath a cottonwood. He poured whiskey over the grave, like it was a cross. Then came the day 2 outlaw gangs met just outside their home. Gunfire split the sky. Stray rounds tore through walls like paper. His son, 8 years and bright as the prairie sky, took one through the spine while playing with the stick horse by the window. The man didn't scream. He didn't cry. He held the boy until dawn, then buried him beside the rifle. He never picked up a gun again. Now the porch lay splintered. They'd come during the night, Bodie Cray and 2 others. They didn't bother kicking the door. They just tore the planks down with rope and horses, left them in a pile like trash. One of them pissed on the corner post before they rode off laughing. Morning came dry and bright, the kind of day that used to promise something good. Now it only showed damage in clearer light. The saloonkeeper stood where the porch had been, hat low, jaw locked. His hands didn't tremble. Across the street, townsfolk peeked from behind shutters, eyes dark with silent questions. No one said a thing, not even the sheriff, who hadn't shown his face since the last time Cray passed through. Lucinda came just after noon. She walked the street barefoot, like boots would be too loud for what she had to say. Her apron was still dusted in flour. She held a cup of coffee in both hands, steam rising like a nervous prayer. He didn't look at her. "They're going to tear this place down," she said gently, "just because they can." He didn't answer. "They're pulling people out of their homes now. Last week they took old Tom's mule for disturbing their horses. Yesterday they knocked Eli's boy to the ground because he was too slow to tip his hat." Still, he said nothing. He took the coffee, sipped once. Steam ghosted off his lip and vanished. "Why won't you stop them?" Her voice cracked. "You're not like them." He turned then, slowly. the kind of turn that feels older than bone. Their eyes met, and she saw it. Whatever lived behind the silence. Grief, fury, restraint held by something barely stronger than memory. "Not yet," he said. She blinked. "What are you waiting for?" He didn't answer. She swallowed hard, then walked away, clutching the empty cup as if it were made of glass. That evening, the sheriff finally came by. Not to help, just to talk. He stood in the doorway where the porch used to be, chewing tobacco like it might help his nerves. "They're riding hard now," Dawson muttered. "Pushing folks more every day. Used to be they just took what they wanted and left. Now they stick around. Looking for control, I guess." The saloon keeper didn't respond. Just wiped down the counter. Dawson sighed. "You knew how to handle yourself back in the war. Heard stories. Union scout. Sniper. Hell, I remember what you did in the Red Cliffs ambush. One bullet, one breath." The man said nothing. "Not a skin you to save the town," Dawson added. "Just remind Em we still got some kind of backbone." He shook his head and left. Didn't even wait for a goodbye. That night, the saloon keeper sat alone inside the half-lit room. Moonlight carved long shadows across the floor. Wind creaked through the broken porch rails. He reached beneath the bar, touched the edge of the floorboard. Didn't lift it. Just let his fingers rest there. Dust rose faintly. He remembered the sound of his son's laugh, high and sudden. The way he used to dance with his mother's apron on, pretending to be a cook. The stick horse. The sun-browned hair. The smell of pine soap and biscuits. And then the gunfire. And the silence. His hand dropped away from the floorboard. Outside, the town held its breath. In the days that followed, the gang grew bolder. They stole chickens, slapped women, laughed through sermons, and urinated behind the church. Cray sat outside the general store and cleaned his boots with the town's flag. Still, the saloon keeper said nothing. Lucinda watched from across the street, tears biting her eyes more often now. Her father kept the door bolted and his shotgun loaded, but neither had been used in years. Fear didn't sleep anymore, it paced. Then one afternoon, Cray himself came walking up to the saloon. No gang, no horse, just him and that grin. The door swung open. The saloon keeper poured a drink before he was asked. "Now that service," Cray drawled. He slid into a stool. "You know, I had my doubts about you. Thought maybe you were one of them silent types, thinking they're better than the rest of us. But you," he sipped the drink, "you're just empty, ain't you?" The saloon keeper didn't blink. Cray leaned closer. A man who don't fight back either lost everything or never had anything to begin with. The glass cracked in the saloon keeper's grip. Cray smirked. "Well, guess we'll find out which." Then he stood and walked out, spurs jangling like the last seconds on a ticking clock. That night, the wind came cold through the canyon, and beneath the saloon's floorboards, the dust shifted. It started with the smell, sharp and thick, like pitch and punishment. Then came the light, orange and angry, climbing the walls of the livery like it had a mind of its own. Flames licked the sky with greedy tongues, curling smoke into the stars and swallowing the night whole. Someone screamed. Then a horse. Then nothing but chaos. The gang didn't hide. They wanted to be seen. They rode in under a full moon, torches in hand, laughter in their throats. The livery was just the beginning. Old Martin, the stable master, stumbled out coughing, eyes red, beard singed, cradling the limp form of a foal barely 2 weeks old. He dropped to his knees in the dust, while the gang circled behind him, whooping, yelling, daring anyone to stop them. No one did. Windows slammed shut, doors locked. The sheriff never showed. And then, through the smoke and rising panic, the saloon keeper stepped into the street. Hat low, coat open, dust curling around his boots like fog around a tombstone. He didn't run, didn't shout, just walked, slow and deliberate, as if the fire were a sunrise and he had nowhere to be. A rider spotted him and called out, mockery sharp in his voice, but the saloon keeper kept moving, past the bodies in the dirt, past the burning beams, past the sound of horses breaking their tethers and bolting into the night. He turned into the saloon, closed the door behind him, and disappeared into the dark. Lucinda stood frozen in her doorway. hands clenched at her chest. Her face glowed red from the flames across the street. She wanted to scream at someone, at the gang, at the sheriff, at God. But her voice had gone dry from fear days ago. Then the door to the saloon opened again, and he came out carrying something long and wrapped in canvas and cord. He stepped into the middle of the road and knelt. The gang didn't notice. Not yet. They were still celebrating, still tossing bottles through windows and dancing on rooftops. Lucinda's breath caught in her throat. The saloonkeeper laid the canvas on the ground, unrolled it like a priest revealing sacred scripture. The town's lantern light caught steel, a glint of promise. A rifle. Not just any rifle. Long barrel. Custom scope. Wood polished by time and use. It looked like it had been buried for years, and still it gleamed like Judgment Day. Lucinda felt something shift in her chest. Something like hope. Something like terror. By morning, every soul in Silver Butte would know. He was carrying a Henry. Word spread like wildfire behind the fire. Murmurs at first, then gasps, then declarations. He's got a long-shot Henry with scope rings. I heard he used to shoot rebs from a mile out. No. He hunted men after the war. Government kind. Whatever the truth, the effect was the same. The fear that had chained the town for months cracked, just a little. Inside the saloonkeeper worked in silence. He cleared a space behind the bar, pulled up 2 floorboards, and laid the rifle across the wood like a relic. He checked the bolt, the scope, the trigger, fingers moving with the familiarity of ritual. Then he began to move. He climbed the stairs to the roof. He measured lines of sight, angles, shadows. He marked corners with chalk. He dragged crates and barrels into new positions, changed the architecture of defense with nothing more than instinct and memory. Lucinda followed him to the saloon just before dawn. She didn't knock. Just stepped inside, eyes wide, breath shallow. She found him adjusting a set of mirrors across the upstairs windows. He didn't look at her, but he knew she was there. They'll come again, she whispered. I know. They'll try to kill you. They'll try. She stepped closer. What do you need? He paused, turned. There was something in his face now, something different than before. Not warmth, not exactly, but purpose. Fire with direction. Help me seal the side alley, he said. She nodded. They worked until the sky turned gray. By sunrise, the town was moving. Quiet but awake. Old Martin, burned hand wrapped in cloth, dragged a water pump to the edge of the square. Young Eli, barely 12, climbed the hardware store's roof with a bucket of nails. 2 women from the chapel spread broken glass across the rear alley behind the bakery. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a start. They didn't talk about rebellion, or war, or vengeance. They talked in nods, in hammer strikes, in the hush of shared breath. And above them all, watching, calculating, preparing, was the man no one named. He placed the Henry on a sandbag at the church bell tower just as the sun cracked the ridgeline. Wind stirred his coat. His finger brushed the trigger. Not to pull, just to remember. Below, Lucinda lit the final lantern near the alley. Then she looked up. He met her eyes through the scope. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Butte, the saloonkeeper gave someone a smile. Small, almost broken, but real. The town was ready. The trap was set, and the dust had finally settled on the trigger. The sun rose slow that morning, dragging shadows across the dirt like a giant reluctant to wake. A hush blanketed Silver Butte, thick as a prayer held too long in the chest. No horses, no footsteps, no wind, just silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. The Devil's Tooth gang didn't notice at first. They rode in loud, as always, laughter echoing off the facades of shuttered shops. Dust kicked up behind them, catching sunlight like ash from a fire already started. Bodie Cray led them, reins in one hand, a whiskey bottle in the other, shouting to no one in particular. Time to finish the mouse, boys. Let's see if he squeaks. The gang hooted behind him, fanning out in loose formation, cocky as wolves approaching a pen of lambs. They didn't see the missing boots on porches, the absence of faces behind windows. They didn't see the shine of rifle barrels just behind the light. Then came the crack. One shot. Sharp. Clean. Not rushed. The kind of sound that cuts through air like a straight question. A rider slumped sideways. Fell before he understood he was dead. His horse kept running without him. The gang froze. What the hell? Someone started, but another crack answered. This one from a different angle. Another rider jerked backward, dropped into the dust. His hat flew off before his body hit the ground. Panic bloomed like a brush fire. Scatter. Cray bellowed, spinning his horse around. Find that bastard. They broke formation, pulling rifles, ducking behind troughs and wagons. The silence was gone now, replaced by chaos. Horses screamed. Spurs clanged. Bullets began to fly, but wild, unsure, desperate. From the rooftops, the saloonkeeper moved like wind-made flesh. He shifted position, slipping between crates and chimneys. His long-barreled Henry braced steady against a knee. His eyes didn't blink. He exhaled once, fired again. Another man fell, this one reaching for his throat, choking on disbelief. Down below, townsfolk struck. Mrs. Elder slammed a cart into the alleyway behind the apothecary, blocking an escape route. Young Eli and two other boys rolled barrels into the center of the square, forming a crude barricade. Old Martin, hand still bandaged from the fire, stood by the church with a broken pitchfork and the kind of fury that made men brave. The gang, used to ruling by fear, found the town unrecognizable. And still the shots came, methodical, precise. The kind of shooting that belonged in war stories or legend, not on dusty streets with broken windows and hand-painted signs. Bodie Cray ducked behind a water trough, blood flecking his coat. Not his own, not yet. He scanned the rooftops, face twisted. He's just one man, he roared. Just a goddamn barkeep. He stood to fire, but the barkeep was gone. Vanished from that rooftop, already 2 buildings away. A shadow with purpose. A ghost with old debts to collect. Then a scream. Lucinda. Cray turned in time to see 2 of his men drag her from the bakery. Her face was bloodied, hair loose, eyes burning with fury and terror. They pushed her toward Cray like a trophy. She was running messages. One of them said, "Caught her behind the stables." Cray smiled like a man who'd found the last card in the deck. He grabbed her, dragged her into the open, pistol pressed to her temple. "Come on out, hero," he shouted. "You want her to live. You show your face." Silence. "I'll kill her right here," Cray spat. "And I'll burn the rest of this town to match your porch." The saloonkeeper appeared like smoke from the edge of the square. He walked slow, calm. The Henry wasn't in his hands. It was strapped to his back. His hands were open, empty. He stopped 10 paces away. Cray laughed. "There he is. The mouse." He jammed the pistol tighter against Lucinda's temple. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stared at the saloonkeeper, jaw clenched. "You ain't got it in you." Cray sneered. "You're just a barkeep with old bones." The saloonkeeper blinked once, then moved, faster than memory. The Henry came off his back, swung forward, braced against a shoulder. Click. One shot. Lucinda dropped. Not hit, just released. She hit the ground hard, rolled, scrambled clear. Cray screamed. His shoulder exploded in red as the pistol spun out of his hand and clattered to the dirt. Another shot. Clean. The revolver shattered like glass. Cray stumbled, clutching the ruined meat of his shoulder, teeth bared in pain. "You son of a—" The saloonkeeper was already walking. Each step was thunder. He reached Cray, looked down, shadows crawling over his weathered face. "I ain't missed in 15 years, he said, voice low, steady. "And today ain't the day." Then he drove his fist into Cray's jaw. The gang leader crumpled like a cut rope, unconscious before he hit the ground. Silence returned. But this time it was different. It wasn't fear. It was breath. Relief. The kind of silence that follows survival. Lucinda stood slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. Her eyes found the saloonkeeper's. She wanted to say something. "Thank you. Maybe. Or I knew you weren't just a barkeep." But no words came. Only the look. And he gave her one back. Then he turned, gun still warm, hat still low, and walked into the rising sun. The smoke had long since drifted off toward the ridges, and the fires were no more than black scars on buildings and memory. What remained of the Devil's Tooth gang had been taken away, some in wagons, some in pine boxes. The rest scattered like buzzards chased from a carcass, never to return. Silver Butte was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. In the days that followed, folks moved like people waking from a long, strange dream. Hammers replaced gunfire. Ladders leaned against rooftops. The shattered windows of the general store were fitted with new panes, and someone even replanted the flower box outside the church. The saloon keeper fixed the porch himself. He didn't speak much, didn't boast, didn't tell the tale. Not that anyone asked him to. They told it for him, filling in gaps with wonder, layering truth with the soft gold of legend. By the end of the week, children were whispering how he could shoot a man's buttons off at 50 yards, and old men claimed they'd always known he wasn't just a barkeep. Lucinda brought him a signboard one morning, painted careful and proud in bright, bold lettering, the hero of Silver Butte. He stood looking at it for a long time, then reached up and ran a thumb over the wet paint. A smudge formed where the H had been. "I appreciate it," he said softly, "but take it back." Her face fell, not from pride but confusion. "Why?" He looked past her, toward the hills. "Because the day I start believing I'm a hero is the day I stop doing what needs doing." She nodded, but it didn't stop the weight in her chest from sinking deeper. Still, she took the sign home and didn't repaint it. The sheriff handed in his star the next morning, laid it on the saloon bar, looked the saloonkeeper dead in the eye, and said, "I reckon I'm not the man this town needs anymore." The saloonkeeper didn't reply. He just slid the star back across the wood and went back to wiping the same clean glass. So the people did what they had to. They watched each other's backs, formed their own rules. No more 10 stars. No more waiting for someone else to act. The saloonkeeper stayed, but it was different now. When he poured drinks, folks tipped their hats. When he walked down the street, children quieted, wide-eyed. Even dogs stopped barking as he passed, as though something ancient and knowing rode in his steps. But he didn't seek any of it, didn't linger in crowds. He was the same man behind the bar, quiet hands, steady eyes. And every now and then, when the sky got too red or the town too still, he'd walk out past the edge of town, toward the canyon's lip, where the land dropped into silence and stone. It was on one of those walks that Lucinda found him kneeling in the dust. He was digging, slow, methodical, like it wasn't the first time. When she saw what he pulled from the earth, wrapped in oilskin and years, she understood. The Henry rifle, long-barreled, worn but clean, the same that had dropped men like thunder. He brushed it off, held it for a moment, his hand fit around it like it never had let go. Lucinda approached, careful not to speak too loud. "You're burying it again?" He didn't look at her, just nodded. "But why not keep it?" she asked. "You saved us. That rifle saved us." He placed the rifle in the hole gently, like laying down a sleeping child. Then he began covering it with earth. "I didn't save anyone," he said, "just did what needed doing." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that her life, the town's future, it all hinged on what he'd done. But the way he said it, like a man with more ghosts than memories, stopped her. When the last handful of dust patted down the dirt, he stood. His coat flapped in the canyon wind. Behind him, the sun dipped low, drawing long lines across the earth. They walked back in silence. That night, he poured himself a single drink. No one else in the saloon, just shadows and oil lanterns and the faint scent of pine soap and old leather. He didn't toast or speak, just drank, then set the glass down and stared at the wall like he was waiting for time to say something worth hearing. He never did put up a sign, and though the town whispered and visitors came asking about the man who'd held off a gang alone, there was never a story they could write down. No name etched in stone, just quiet nods and maybe a finger pointing toward the saloon with the crooked porch and the man who didn't smile much. He came from nowhere, left scars, not stories. But if you stand still on the edge of Silver Butte, just as the wind picks up and the dust begins to dance, you might hear something. Not a voice, not quite, but a breath, steady as a marksman's aim,